Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to our /MaliciousCompliance, where people follow exact orders despite the ones they very much dislike. And in today's episode, we've got companies losing thousands of dollars, nasty classmates learning hard lessons, one OP's parents destroy a neighbor's property. My goodness, this one's wild. So yeah, sit back, relax, and try not to shake your heads too hard at today's stories. Let's dive in. So this one's pretty long, and this story is actually why I made an account to share this with all of you. I've been waiting about 2 months for this fallout in all of its glory. So that said, here's a little backstory. I work as an office engineer at a mid-sized, prefabricated concrete structures plant. About 3 months ago, our plant manager left spontaneously for a much higher paying gig down south. Due to this, his responsibilities were given to whoever had capacity. I was put in charge of purchasing, with the caveat that any purchase order over $5,000 had to be reviewed by that project's manager. This was due to a mistake that I made on an order, which only cost us a couple of grand but delayed a project. Also, due to lower labor costs and the size of our own steel shop, we have most of our large steel structures fabricated just across the border in Canada. All that said, on to the story. Our general manager is acting project manager on a project which includes a large steel frame surrounded by concrete modules. I was told to get this frame quoted by our Canadian metal fabricator. I get the quote back and I throw together the purchase order. However, when I look back through the project specifications before sending the PO for review, I see that our project has a Buy American clause, not Buy America as we had assumed. I also want to note that almost all of our projects are Buy America, and we're very familiar with it. The little letter N makes all the difference. Under Buy America, a Canadian fabricator can use American steel and meet every requirement. However, under Buy American, all steel must be domestic and all fabrication must be done in the US. My GM was out of town on what was essentially a vacation to a project site we have in Hawaii and was having none of my calls and emails marked as urgent. I informed him in a couple of emails and multiple voicemails that we had to go to a different fabricator or the product would be rejected. I get an angry email back, basically calling me stupid and telling me to place the order immediately. I tried one more call in desperation, which he sent straight to voicemail, and then I send him over the completed purchase order with the Buy American specification attached. I told him that this is well over my $5,000 limit, and I needed to get him to approve it before I sent it out. He approved it in less than 10 minutes, and I sent it and I waited for the fallout. And it finally happened. Our product was delivered yesterday, and today the project owner sends an inspector to make sure everything was done per project drawings. The inspector notices the manufacturer right away, and he told us he would have to reject the product, purely because it doesn't meet Buy American. In less than 20 minutes, I was getting an earful from my GM, asking why this wasn't caught before we wasted $60,000 on something that would clearly be rejected. I let him finish his rant, insulting my intelligence, threatening to fire me, breaking protocol, screaming at me that I'm useless, the works. I then asked him to pull up my emails from the order date, and I showed him that he was informed of the issue and my concerns were ignored. He didn't take this well, and he told me to get the heck out of his office in 3 seconds or I'd no longer have a job. Now there's nothing left but to wait. Our project's gonna be delayed at least a month, which we pay a fine for every day that they're kept waiting, and the owner of our company's getting involved. I have the email saved on a drive at home and the phone logs that show I left multiple voicemails on the same date, which can't be touched by the GM. I'm still a bit nervous, but I think I covered myself pretty well in this situation. You know, one thing I've learned from reading these posts, guys, is you always need to cover your butts, especially when you know your boss is mega wrong. And what a fantastic job OP did. And for those who are wondering the fallout, OP does pop into the comments to say, so I actually ended up leaving this company mainly due to poor management. I never really got in trouble for this, but my GM was always an a-hole to me afterwards. So this is the story of how my dad, against my advice, accidentally weaponized a tree. To give some context, I live in the capital of a Central European country, and recently, I visited my parents at the countryside. They needed me to help deal with some trees they wanted to fell. I assumed they wanted to finally make short work of the semi-healthy trees along the driveway that kept branching into the way, but no, they decided that the row of trees at the southeastern corner of the property all had to go. And you should know 3 things here. Number 1, those trees are really tall, like 15 meters, 50 feet, and rather thin. Number 2, there's an equally high barn just a few meters behind those trees on the neighbor's property to the south. It's pretty old, but it's been renovated time and time again to serve as storage and a party location. Number 3, in front of the trees are compost containers and a crooked walnut tree and bushes my mother planted, creating a corridor of around 7 meters, 23 feet for the trees to land in without breaking anything. Also important is my sister and I are actually the co-owners of the house, as my father transferred ownership to us some years ago. So far, those trees had survived their fair share of storms, but they'd become a problem as they kept growing. And since the new neighbors on the property bordering on the eastern side are in the process of building a house, they would become their problem as well. So I agreed that they had to go. However, my parents wanted to cut them down by themselves, meaning my dad would be the one to operate the chainsaw. He worked as a technician before retiring, and he always did a lot of repair and building work in and around the house. But he's way past 70, and he's adopted a rather unhealthy lifestyle after leaving the workforce. And his eyesight and motor skills, while still perfectly suited for most kinds of technical operations, have deteriorated a bit. So knowing this, I objected, and I suggested hiring a professional to do the job and sharing the costs. I argued that any damage, as beechwood is pretty heavy, or injury that might occur if things went sideways wouldn't be covered by insurance and thus would come in quite costly. Well, my cheap parents wouldn't have any of it, and they even refused to get an estimate from a professional. I did some basic research, and I find out that the cost would probably come in at around 500 to 1,000 euros, which is $600 to $1,200. It's not a small sum, but the forester or lumberjack who would take up the work would be responsible for any damage. My parents were stubborn old folk though. Even after trying to bring my points across several times, they said to me, No, we don't need a professional. Why should we waste money when we can do it by ourselves? It'll be fine, they said. Literally. Now, usually, I'm able to put them off bad ideas by convincing one of them, but this time, they both were hell-bent on going for it. Once again, I voiced my concerns to my mother, hoping that she would talk some sense into Dad. But she says to me, You know your father. You just need to shut up and trust he can do it. He's not as old as you think he is. Now, I knew that once my mom made up her mind, all hope's basically lost, as my mother can be the most stubborn. As a side note, as property co-owner, I technically could have forbidden my parents to fell those trees on their own. But they are my parents. I love them. They're adults. They live there. And plus, my mom was mean and she told me to shut up about it. So I decided to comply. I told them that they should go ahead, and if things get bad though, I wouldn't help them with this. And my mother just assured me it'll all be fine. The next morning, I was woken up by my mother calling me to help cut up the first tree which my father had brought down successfully. So I dutifully crawled out of bed and I did my part in this little deforestation project. Tree number 2 and 3 out of 5 were also felled without incident. And then came tree number 4. My father hadn't seen this one higher up branch that stretched between the branches of tree number 5. So once the chainsaw had fully severed the stem, instead of falling sideways as intended, it got caught up, swirled around its axis, and then crashed into the walnut tree, which starts to bend significantly due to the load. Now, they wanted help moving this giant tree by pushing it to roll along the edge of one of the walnut tree's main branches. Besides me knowing that this wasn't doable, as I said, a 15-meter high tree is a heavy affair, I refused. And this is when my mother says, "But you said you'd help us once a tree is felled." I then pointed out that I would only assist once it's laying on the ground, and leaning into a walnut tree doesn't quite fit that definition. There was more pleading, but now was time to be stubborn, and rightfully so. It gets way worse though. Since there was no way to pull the beech tree away, my father decided to cut parts off of its lower stem until handling it would be possible. Multiple laws of physics, however, intervened after he cut the second large chunk off. This shifted the center of mass of the beech, so now it suddenly started to tilt when its branches prevented it from sliding downwards as intended. The walnut tree reacted to the lighter load and shift of balance by springing back, knocking the beech into the neighbor's barn like a battering ram. The dry wooden wall planks didn't stand a chance against the force of the tree. The tree forced its way into the building, creating an impressive giant hole. It's obviously a panicky moment, destroying the neighbor's property. My parents just stood there dumbfounded, my dad slowly scratching his head and trying to realize the situation, while my mother starts to full-on panic, screaming, "Oh no, 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 what do we do now? What if the neighbor calls the police on us?" I had watched the whole thing from the balcony, and I couldn't decide whether to be shocked or to descend into uncontrollable laughter. Closer investigation from the outside showed that the tree had not only smashed the roof and the wall, but it crushed a chair, a table, also caused a set of wall-mounted cupboards with equipment to fully collapse, thus causing even more damage. The other big issue now is there's no way of getting it unstuck from the barn without entering. A few hours later, the neighbor who knew about my parents' plans returned home, which is where the story could have taken a very bitter and costly turn. He proved to be a gracious guy though, and he took the incident in stride. He first was negatively amazed by what transpired, but after the inspection of the barn, he didn't deem it necessary to involve insurance or officials. He said that he would repair the damage by himself if my parents agreed to pay for materials, the replacement of the destroyed furniture, and some beer for his time, which they gladly accepted. The funny thing though, is this damage is easily upwards of thousands of euros, plus the beer of course, making professional tree removal look like a really good deal. My father did offer to assist with the repairs, and the neighbor did think about it for a fraction of a second, and then politely declined. I wonder why. P.S. Tree number 5 is still standing. Yeah, this is what they call trying to save a dime, but it ends up costing you $1. And guys, I've read enough stories and I've seen enough fail videos to know that cutting down a tree yourself, especially ones that are 50 feet tall, is something you should call a professional for because, case in point. And this person comments, "As a certified arborist, I'm horrified when people try to drop big trees without professional training or equipment. I'm glad nobody was hurt, but this could have ended very badly." And this person comments and they share a similar tree-related story. They say, "One day, I came home and my mom told me that the right side neighbor talked to her. The neighbor claimed that a city official came over while we weren't there. They stopped by her house and they asked her to pass along a message, that the tree on our side of the fence is too unruly. A few branches are getting too close to the neighbor's house and the city will fine us if we don't cut down those branches." Hearing that, I just thought to myself, well, that's probably not right. The city was going to fine us without an official notice? I was certain that the neighbor either got the warning herself, or she was lying for some free gardening. Now, it was our tree, so we would have done it if they'd asked properly, but my mom and I just decided to cut it down so it didn't become an issue again. She sent me over to let the neighbors know, and after some pleasantries, I told her of our decision. Her expression immediately darkened. She said, "Well, the tree's in a perfect place to cover my bedroom window from the sun and give me plenty of privacy. Isn't it cheaper to trim it?" Cue malicious compliance to the quote, city warning. I told her with a concerned face that we're anxious about the city's fine, and if we had to keep trimming it, it would be costly and a huge headache. At that point, some slight panic seeps into her voice. She offered to pay for the trimming herself. In other words, we wouldn't have to do a thing, nor pay a single penny. Now, a better man would have said yes, but by this point, I was a bitter man. I kept a concerned face on, and I told her if I ever left my mom, she would have to deal with it. And with her getting older, I wouldn't want her to concern herself with such matters, or having to keep checking in with the neighbor for a fear of a fine. She practically begged us not to have it removed. But at the end of the day, it's our tree, our fine, our decision. I left shortly after. The tree came down that weekend, and so did the neighbor's blinds to her bedroom. It's been a few years since then, and as of yet, I still haven't seen them go back up. And to think, if she had just asked nicely, we'd still be trimming those branches at no cost to her. When I was in 9th grade, my grades weren't the best, but I managed to stay afloat thanks to my father, who majored in physics and is amazing in math. At the moment, I was going through a rough patch emotionally, so that also affected my grades. Most of my friends were students that had straight A's, and they had stuck-up personalities when it came to studying. I knew that I wasn't seen as the brightest student, but I used to be a straight A student too, and I knew I had potential. Mr. Jones, our math teacher, gave us an exam to take home twice a semester. The test was open book, and we were allowed to work on it however we liked. Our grades group chat was usually filled with messages when this happened, filled with students asking for answers, photos, and more. Meanwhile, my friends' group chat undermined the work of other students who didn't have the best grades like they did. They usually just asked between themselves or other students like them for answers. This would usually get to me. It made me feel like I wasn't enough for them because of the grades I was getting. Somehow, probably fatherly instinct, my dad caught up to something and he stepped up. He told me, "OP, you're brilliant. Let's get to work on this exam because I know you can get an A." And this was enough for me to push through. We had a total of 4 take-home exams that school year. By April, I had gotten an A on 3 of the 4 exams, and I kept it to myself. When my friends asked me, I just said I had a good grade, hiding my exams from them. The last week of April, Mr. Jones announces that tomorrow we would have our final take-home exam, and this time it would be more difficult than before. He gave us the exam at the end of the class. The exam was nothing like we'd ever seen, and after looking through our books, it had some parts that we couldn't even understand completely. The group chat was filled with kids just freaking out. When I got home, I ran to my dad's room and I explained the issue to him, and we decided to work on it the whole evening. Although my dad could have easily given me the answers, he didn't. He helped me read through the book and understand everything enough to complete the exam. By 9 o'clock, we managed to answer the whole exam, proofread it, and made sure we got it all right and finished. On the other hand, my classmates were still active in the group chat until 1 or 2 in the morning, trying to solve one pesky little equation that proved to be the hardest one. Thankfully, being a math wizard, my dad notices that you needed to learn a process 2 sections ahead before being able to answer that equation, and without it, you would get the whole process wrong. The next day, I get to school, and I saw how each of my classmates arrived and they would ask others for help with the equation. On multiple occasions, I offered my help. My friends just looked at me and said, "No, not from you." 10 minutes before the bell rang, one of my friends, Paula, the snobbiest one in the group, arrives in a frantic manner. She asked everyone what result they got, everyone except for me. I managed to get close to her and I observed her exam. My eyes opened immediately and I almost felt my mouth go wide open, but I stopped myself. She had almost every equation and exercise completely wrong. I felt so bad that I got my exam out and I went up to her. I was hoping to help her and explain to her where she went wrong. I said to her, "Hey Paula, do you need help? I've got my exam here if you'd like to compare." Paula's eyes almost rolled back and she took my exam into her hands. She scans my paper, smiling faintly and trying not to laugh. Giving me my exam back, she says to me, "None of your answers are correct. We literally have all different answers." I asked her, "Are you sure?" trying to insist and making her understand. I said to her, "I did these with my dad. He's really good at math," and she stops me and says, "I said I don't need your help. I don't want your help. Check your answers because I guarantee your dad taught you wrong. Those answers are not correct." And with that, she walks away. And I have to admit, at that moment, I felt awful. My eyes got clouded with tears and I almost cried. I knew that with my dad's help, I had gotten the answers right. So I sucked up my tears and I kept quiet. I just thought to myself, if you don't want my help, cue malicious compliance. Right when the bell sounded, Paula asked me in front of our friend group if I changed my exam answers. I just responded with, "Nope." She then opened her eyes and she laughed a bit and she said, "You know you're gonna fail, right? Those answers made no sense." She was waiting to get a reaction out of me and she said, "I'm just worried for you." I just responded, "Well, as I tried to tell you, I worked on it with my dad's help and he helped me understand the questions." The conversation ended there, but everyone in our friend group thought the same thing as Paula, that I was going to fail. The next class, everyone was nervous to see the exam grade. 10 minutes before the bell rang, Mr. Jones gets our exams out of his bag, and he starts calling each student by their last and first name. Paula was the first to be called. When she got up, she received her exam and she tried asking Mr. Jones something, but he quickly shut her down. We were seated a bit far away from each other, so I didn't know her grade right away. A few minutes later, I was called, and I went to the teacher's desk. I extend my hand towards Mr. Jones, and I looked at my grade. It was 100% A+. I couldn't hide my smile. I looked at Mr. Jones, who then said in a lower voice, "You did well. You're the only one who got all the questions correct. Go sit down." I immediately went back to my desk with a smile on my face. My eyes connected with Paula's and I just sat down, showing others my grade. While explaining an equation to one of the students near me, I heard someone, and it was Paula. She was standing in front of my desk, her exam in hand. She asked me, "What grade did you get?" I replied, "I got an A. Why?" I was ignoring how she was practically spitting fumes out of her nose. She then says to me, "Let me see your exam." She grabs my exam before I could even answer, and I said, "Yeah, go ahead." While she compared her answers to mine, I saw the most beautiful array of emotions going through Paula's eyes. Rage, confusion, frustration, envy, and so much more. She was having an internal mental breakdown. She then says to me, "Show me how you did this after class." To which I responded, "Nope, you said you didn't want any of my help." Paula just got up and she went back to her desk, almost crying about her grade, and in her own way admitting defeat. She had ignored my help and she knew that that was the reason why she failed. I also later learned she got a D on that last exam, and that was more than enough for me. When I was in grade 6 in the early 90s, I was just a normal adolescent boy with a bicycle and a powerful desire for a Slurpee. I lived in a complex of condominiums that were divided into multiple courts, composed of a rectangle of buildings with gaps in between, allowing for an easy cut-through. I lived in court number 7, and in order to get to the back entrance of the complex, near where the 7-Eleven was, I had to go around the lake and cut through court number 2. On this particular day, though, all the boys that lived in court 2 were outside in a circle of bicycles. I knew these kids from school, and no one was unfamiliar to me, so being there should not have been a big deal. For some reason, though, the leader, Gary, comes over on his bike to block my path. He says to me, "Where you going?" I respond, 7-Eleven. He then says to me, "Well, you can't come through here. This is our turf. Go around." I say to him, "Come on, Gary, get out of the way, please. I just want a Slurpee." Gary wasn't giving in, though. He demands me go around. I respond, "Or what?" He then says, "Go around, or you have to fight us, all of us. What's it gonna be?" At this point, I had noticed that the other boys, 4 in total, had circled behind me. I thought it was about to get real. There was little I could do to stop it. I tried one more time, and I said to Gary, "I really don't want to. Can't you just let me go through?" This is when Gary mocks me, and he says to me, "Aw, I'm too scared to fight. I want to go through." He then pretended to rub tears from his eyes, and the other boys laughed. And in hindsight, I suppose I could have turned around and circled to court 2, but I felt this would have set a bad precedent. If I went around that day, I would have to go around every day, and if I did turn back around, they would have won, and they would be convinced that they made me turn around. There was nothing left to do but to do exactly as I was told. Cue the malicious compliance, though I didn't know it was malicious compliance at the time. I just said to them, "Fine, if you want me to fight, I'll fight you right now." The thing about me is I was a much bigger boy than these boys. They saw me as a fat kid, but being kids, they didn't know that us bigger boys possessed a lot more strength. One of the scrawny boys pushed me from behind, which barely moved me. So I grab the nearest kid and I pull him off his bike and I throw him to the ground. My thought is I would get the worst of it, being a 5-on-1 fight, but I silently vowed that at least one kid besides me was going to have his work cut out explaining the bruises at the dinner table. I then grabbed Gary, I wrapped my left arm around his head in a headlock, and I start wrenching his head as hard as I could, and then threw him to the ground. He started crying when he smacked the ground and realized he got a bloody nose. Fortunately, 11-year-old kids are basically made of rubber, so they were all okay. I also realized that his buddies didn't rush me. They literally just scattered. The courtyard was empty. It was only the 2 of us left. I just picked him up, dusted him off, and I asked if he wanted to get Slurpees with me, as my mom had given me enough money for more than one. We hung out the rest of the day, and I showed him how to make the flint from a lighter explode, which we both thought was the coolest thing ever. The next week, I saw Gary outside with some of the neighbor boys. I slung open the sliding glass door to the patio, and with a big smile on my face, I shouted, "What are you doing on my turf, Gary?" The boys all laughed their heads off, having heard about Gary's last attempt at being hard. Gary just laughs it off, and he asked if I wanted to join to ride bikes. We're still friends to this day. What a wholesome ending to that post, and I'm glad they're able to be friends to this day. That said though, in my opinion, I think Gary never actually planned to get into a scrap that day, and he was just pulling the tough guy act like a lot of little kids do, and OP just knocked some sense into him. I just love how it went from a full-on brawl to, hey, you want to get some Slurpees and blow up a lighter? Again, what a wholesome post that was. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled People episode, where psycho Karen bosses are tormenting their workers, and it only gets worse from there. Guys, go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.